Hello, and welcome back to Mr. B Teaches History. Today we will examine the key events that led to the fracturing of our political system into parties and factions, even against the warning of our first president, George Washington. The two parties in question are the Federalists under Alexander Hamilton, John Adams, and others, and the Democratic Republicans led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. Just a note, depending on our sources, Jefferson and Madison's party can go by several names: Republicans, Democrats, Jeffersonians. I will be referring to them as the Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans to try and roll these terms into one. So let's get started. The start of political parties begins with the battles between the Secretary of State from Virginia, Thomas Jefferson, and the Secretary of the Treasury from New York, Alexander Hamilton. Both of these men had different views on how to read and interpret the Constitution. Hamilton was a loose constructionist, which means he had a very broad interpretation of the powers found inside the U.S. Constitution. Hamilton used the necessary and proper clause in the Constitution to justify the expansion of federal power because the Constitution gives some powers to Congress. They must have other powers to exercise those specifically listed powers. Jefferson was a strict constructionist, which was a narrow interpretation of the Constitution. These people think that if the Constitution does not expressly grant the government the power, they could not exercise it at all. We will give an example of these interpretations in more detail in a minute. The United States was in dire financial straits from the Revolutionary War, even 6 years later. The federal government had $54 million in debt, and the states had a total of $25 million. The paper money issued by the government was worthless, and there was no foreign credit available. Hamilton had a plan to place the United States on a more secure financial footing. First, the federal government would take over all the debts of the states incurred during the war for independence. Secondly, he wanted to create a national bank that would collect taxes, hold government money, make loans, and pay the obligations of the federal government. Thirdly, he wanted to raise taxes on imported manufactured goods to protect young American industries from cheap imports from Europe, specifically Great Britain, including whiskey. Jefferson and many states objected to the debt plan because they had already paid off their debts, and they did not want their tax dollars to pay off the debts of other states. Some also criticized this law because it favored rich speculators who bought old war bonds for a fraction of the original purchase price. Therefore, they made lots of money on them. Hamilton got this passed by agreeing to locate the national capital, currently in New York City, on the banks of the Potomac River between Virginia and Maryland. Jefferson argued that the Bank of the United States was unconstitutional because no specific power that was granted to Congress in the Constitution, whereas Hamilton argued that the bank was a necessary and proper power implied under the powers of Congress to tax and spend money. Congress passed, and the president reluctantly signed it. Jefferson saw Hamilton's taxes that would encourage American manufacturing as a threat to the farming way of life in the United States because he thought everyone should own land to be as independent as possible. Jefferson and Hamilton also fought over how the United States should respond to the fighting in Europe centered around the French Revolution. After the death of Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette, several monarchical nations, including England, allied against the French Republic, and France eventually went on the offensive to get rid of the European continent of kings and queens. They asked the United States to fulfill their part of their perpetual alliance they signed in the Revolutionary War and to help them in the fight. Jefferson supported the French and thought we should help them in their fight against tyranny. Hamilton thought it was foolish to get into another war and argued that the alliance was with the king, who is now dead, so is no longer valid. Washington ultimately sided with Hamilton, which led Jefferson to resign from his post as Secretary of State in protest and start a party to fight against Hamilton and his ideals. Before and after his resignation, Jefferson would write horrible pieces about Hamilton and other Federalists in the newspapers. Hamilton and other people who supported his ideas would respond in kind. In response to the expansions of the government under the ideals of Hamilton, Adams, and Washington, Jefferson founded the Democratic Republican Party. They feared that Hamilton's group, called the Federalists, were trying to establish a corrupt monarchical society with high taxes, a standing army, and government-sponsored industries. Hamilton, Washington, and Adams feared that Jefferson's Democratic Republicans wanted to destroy the Union back to individual states, which would then subvert the property rights of the people and ally the country with revolutionary France. This was the first era of political parties in the United States that would dominate elections until 1816.
If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or clarifications you would like to make about this lecture, please leave a comment below. If you learned something new, please consider leaving a like. If you would like to receive notifications of more content like this, please consider subscribing and ringing the notification bell. If you would like to support this channel and creator financially, please check out the links in the description for merchandise or sites that will provide me direct financial support for the work of this channel. Thank you for your time and have a great day. Class dismissed.